It's day 2 of 2024. Happy New Year, everyone, and thank you for joining us on the program. I am Nifemi Oguntoye. Yesterday, President Tinubu signed the 28.7 trillion naira 2024 budget into law, and we are continuing the January to December budget cycle as we kick-started that, I believe, in 2019 under the President Muhammadu Buhari administration. There are many questions about this budget. How is it going to be funded? And what are we doing differently this time to ensure that we do not keep borrowing, that is eating deep into, our spending plan? I'm joined by two individuals who will join the conversation as we also explore some things mentioned by the president in his New Year's speech yesterday. Joining me in the studio is startup business lawyer and financial analyst Omori Edogiawere. Thank you so much for finding time to come in.
Happy New Year.
Happy New Year to you. Glad to have you around. Dr. Nicolas Felix is APC 2023 youngest presidential aspirant and Deputy National Youth Coordinator of the APC Presidential Campaign Council. Dr. Felix, Happy New Year and thank you for joining us.
Happy New Year. Good to be here.
I'd like us to begin by, just having a background to what happened yesterday. We have a report on the signing of the document and exactly how it transpired.
President Bola Tinubu is excited that the National Assembly gave the budget an expeditious consideration. The National Assembly made an addition of 1.2 trillion naira to the 2024 fiscal document, but President Tinubu is still pleased with it as it reflects a reduction in deficit and an increase in capital expenditure.
It contains a good increase in the capital side, a reduction in recurrent expenditure, and it brought down the deficit from 6.11% to 3.88%.
The Minister of Budget and National Planning, as well as the Coordinating Minister of the Economy, both say this is an implementable budget that captures the key priorities of the Renewed Hope agenda.
Reducing capital and expenditure and reducing the current deficit is going to be implemented. And he was very clear with the warning to all ministries, departments, and agencies that everyone will earn his own pay.
Total expenditure is larger than the recurrent expenditure. Over 10 trillion naira is going to be the capital expenditure, whereas the recurrent is just about 8.8 trillion naira.
The President of the Senate and Speaker of the House of Representatives both insist the brand new budget for 2024 is a landmark achievement as it settles the controversial CBN Ways and Means by approving its securitization.
We have already enjoined all our committees to get to work. And the President has also pointed out that he's going to have a monthly report from the ministers and the MBS, and any agency, any head of any agency or any minister found wanting will have to find his way out of his administration.
With the capital component of the 2023 budget to work concurrently with the budget of 2024 up to 31st March 2024. And another landmark achievement we had was also approving the securitization of the Ways and Means, which has effectively brought to an end these controversial means and ways of borrowing money.
The President also signed the Supplementary Appropriation Bill of 2023, which he has extended by 90 days and will work concurrently with the 2024 budget up to March 31. The hopes of Nigerians clings on the budget of Renewed Hope as President Bola Tinubu drives the process of its implementation. Femi Akonde, TVC News, Abuja.
Let's begin with my guest here in our Lagos studio. 28.7 trillion naira. Some say that's quite ambitious, spending plan for the year, given the revenue shortfall we experienced last year, and the dwindling, the way and manner we've seen the oil price do over the years. But what do you make of this signing? It's the first budget for the Tinubu administration. What stood out for you, and what are your expectations?
Well, I'm excited that Mr. President hit the ground running by signing on the first. So you see, oftentimes one of the things I say about governance is that governance is body language, political will, and execution, right? The president has shown the right body language, leaving the fanfare of New Year festivities to get straight to work and sign. So as it is, the Appropriation Act is in force. So that's good for us. The next would be the political will to ensure the discipline for appropriate implementation, even though I still have a few concerns about a couple of things that make up the budget. But it's not a sprint, it's a marathon, right? It's not a marathon, whichever way, right?
It's not a sprint, it's
a sprint.
Oh, okay.
Right, it's not a sprint, it's a marathon.
So
the implication is that the journey is still ahead, and there's still a lot to tidy up. But if we go also the third component, which is execution, right? Ensuring, I'm concerned about the deficit, even though this is less than 2023. There was a 13 trillion deficit. Now we're looking at about 9 trillion or thereabouts, which is significant, right? This would be the first time in recent times that we have that significant reduction in deficit. But if you also look at the revenue, you will see that oil exports continue to trump the list, right? And I am looking forward to a budget where oil revenue from oil will be 2 or even 3, right? And where we can now look at our non-oil resources, look at our manpower, look at technology, look at our human resource talents, right, which we continue to export. Now, if you sit back and look at the aggregate data of the value of the level of contribution that Nigerian human resource capital have contributed to the developed world, and if you compute that in figures, you'll be shocked at how valuable that is, right? So I'm looking at us beginning to harness these other areas, right? There's so much fixation on oil.
And that's one conversation we've had for, decades, about how do we turn our attention.
But even the expectation from non-oil exports, 3-point-something trillion, it's still fair, right? But a lot can be done, right? We have arable land, right? We have human resource capital. We have mineral resources, which have continued to be underutilized, undercultivated, underexploited, right? Or, for want of better language, revenue going to other places. Government must now begin to look intentionally to harness these potentials, right? Bring all this back into the saddle, right? And then let oil have a run for its money.
Indeed.
Yeah.
We're looking forward to that. We'll talk about oil itself. The president in his New Year's speech talked about local refining and how much impact that will have on this conversation. Let's take the conversation to Dr. Felix. You're the politician here. Perhaps we can, possibly talk about the political intentions, behind all of this, whether or not there's a political will backing, what we've had Mr. President say. This is 2024. The expectations are high. In his New Year Day speech, he also mentioned that he understands, the hardship Nigerians are going through. Do you think this Appropriation Act has the capacity to deliver in such a way that Nigerians are expecting in the new year?
Yes, Happy New Year to you and good morning to Nigerians. I always like to speak as a Nigerian, not as a politician, so let me just throw that in. So, I speak for the average Nigerian, especially the Nigeria youth. Of course, I agree with my dear brother. When you look at the fact that this bill was signed on the 1st, I was quite, surprised. I thought the president would be back from Lagos, probably on Wednesday. It's just the new year. People are still celebrating. Offices were not open. I was very shocked to hear the news that the bill has been signed. This tells me that the main business, the job of running the country is not 8 to 4 or 9 to 5. It's 24 hours. There are no holidays for the president. So this tells me that this is a man who is ready to work, who is ready to get the job done. For this to have been done, he has set the pace. This is the first time we're having this happening. On the 1st of the year, the budget is being signed into law. And that should tell the average Nigerian out there, that we have a man, we have a driver who's ready to get the job done. This alone, the optics of it, I think whether you say he's making a statement or however angle you look at it, whether as a politician or as an average Nigerian, as a businessman, you know that the president is ready to work.
Indeed. When you let us look at the revenue projections. We were just talking about how oil revenues is king here, the major revenue source for government. And in 2023, oil revenue only was able to generate 813 billion naira, lower than the budgetary target of 1.3 trillion naira, representing a substantial variance of 37.4%. How optimistic are you about what this sector it will be bringing, because you also have some business experience in that area?
Now, yes, I would like us as a country to start shifting our focus away from, from just generating revenue from our oil sector. Because first of all, we don't control the price of oil. That's number one. There are other areas are taxes. We have to look into other means of generating revenue. Things are changing. Times are changing. 15 and 100 years from now, oil will not be our main source of income. And if we don't start looking at other areas to generate income, like agriculture, our level of export is very low. We have so much to export to the world, but yet we are not doing that. The Minister of Mineral Resources, mining rather, I think he has a lot to do in this regard. We have, natural resources that God has blessed us with, apart from just the oil. If we can start looking into this, I think we'll be able to generate a lot of revenue. For example, the tech world. We're not doing well in that regard. A few weeks ago, I was on your show, on your station. I talked about how Nigeria youth are generating millions of dollars monthly from online, Facebook, YouTube. And yet, Nigeria, we are not getting the taxes because of the way it's structured. People like somebody like Facebook, a firm like Facebook, cannot pay Nigeria directly because we cannot monetize it. And every month, millions of dollars are paid as taxes to this country. Just imagine if we start, generating income from the tech world, from agriculture, from, exporting the goods. We import than we export. So our focus now must shift away from, generating revenue from oil. Otherwise, we're not going to make it. We'll keep saying the same thing every year, focusing on our oil price. If it goes up, if it comes down, we are panicking. I think now we should focus on generating revenue from other sources.
We all seem to have an idea of what the alternative sources of income should be as revenue generation for the country. Whether or not we're going to see that play out this year is something we have to look forward to. But let me bring the conversation back to the studio. The federal government has projected a foreign borrowing of close to 2 trillion naira. It's exactly 1.77 trillion naira to finance the fiscal deficit of the 2024 budget. Is there a clear and effective plan to fund this budget? And do you think, this borrowing is still within acceptable brackets?
Well, sometimes answers don't come in very clear flanks. And that's because you also want to look at the trajectory. You also want to look at the challenges that have bedeviled this administration and what they have met on ground and their ability to navigate it within this short time. The adequacy or otherwise of this external borrowing will be determined mid-cycle into implementation, right? Do they have to borrow? They don't seem to have any choice, right, in the circumstances. But I would think that if in 2025 we still talk about this quantum of external borrowing, it means that they haven't gotten something right. But right now, the budget needs a buffer. right? The deficit is lower than it was last year and the year before, but it's still a deficit. And for government to run efficiently, it's got to be breached. So what choice do they have? And I think that would be what the question is. And it's not yet 1 year yet to be able to say, okay, let's actively look at the implementation of a budget. Let's see how we're able to plug holes. I feel that government expenditure, even in the 2024 budget, could have been reduced. Right? I feel that this budget could have been a bit more, the belt could have been tightened a bit more, considering our peculiarities and challenges and all that has come in. But I would say again that it's still a bit early, right? For a government that came in May, they had barely 6 months to come up with a plan for the next year vis-a-vis the budget. But now you have 12 calendar months, 365 days for you to now implement a budget that you have absolute control over its implementation and all that. And I think that when we sit down here again, January 2025, we'll be able to assess how well they've managed and if there would be need to bridge the gap again. And even if there would be need, I wouldn't expect that it will still be in this magnitude.
Dr. Felix, we had the Minister of Finance earlier talking about how the capital expenditure this year is above recurrent expenditure. But would you say we've seen that body language on the part of this administration to also reduce its spending drastically to match the current economic reality? Dr. Felix, can you hear me? Well, we'll reconnect with him in the course of the program. Some would say when you look at the budget, critically, in fact, we had some session at the, on the floor of the Senate where certain ministries were being questioned about why do you need to travel with so number of people spending billions of naira at the time where government is trying to explain to Nigerians its policies and all of that. Okay, I understand that Dr. Felix is back. I was asking if you think we've seen enough, cutting in government spending with this administration to mirror Nigeria's current economic realities.
Yeah, when sometimes I hear people complain as regarding, the expenses of the government, you see, there are tools the government needs to run this administration. So usually that is not my focus. My focus has always been what benefits the average Nigerian. When you look at the budget, the fact that we have more as capital expenditure, I think that's what should excite us more than the current expenditure, because we don't see development from recurrent expenditure. Where we see development as a developing nation is when our capital expenditure increases. We look forward to those infrastructure, those projects that we shine light. That's where, vendors, people get employment, companies, contract, all of those things goes into a capital expenditure. So the fact that we have more in this budget as capital expenditure, I think that's something, to be excited about. As regarding government, expenses, there are just some, expenses you cannot overlook. You cannot just, in as much as you want to tighten your belt, you need the tools to work. It's like telling a mechanic, you can't have these fancy tools. You have not made a lot of money, or telling a doctor, you don't need this, fancy or extra bed for the patient. There are just some tools that are necessary. Of course, there are areas, in terms of the traveling that you talked about, going with large number of delegation. Definitely we can do better in that regard. But in terms of the basic stuff that we need as a government, I can't fault, whether the National Assembly or, the presidency for, requesting for such, especially if we're expecting them to sit up and work. We need to give them the tools to get the job done.
So the perception is also key, Mr. Omori. Do you think that we've seen enough effort on the part of government in this regard? For instance, in Argentina, we saw some drastic efforts to cut down government spending. Some would say it seems like business as usual when you look at the way the budgeting has gone, this year. I'm
inclined to share the same sentiment. like I said when I started, I said for the implementing any government policy, you look at three things. You look at body language, you look at political will, and you look at the execution. How diligent has the execution gone, right? So let's look at the body language. We've never had it this bad. And I think that when I mean this bad, the level of hardship, the level of deprivation, the level of need, right? And I'm not referring to wants now, I'm referring to needs. And we've never had a failure, a clear failure of our social safety system. As we've never really had any social safety net, right? But we've had miniature buffers over time. But in the last 4 to 8 years, right, we've never had this level of failure of that social safety net, right? And I would expect that the government will look closely to some of these things and seek to do a bit of tightening of its belt. And I pointed that earlier. And see how to do some financial re-engineering to cut some expenditure, direct to certain measures. I mean, I'm very excited that there's a 100 billion naira fund for consumer credit fund, right, to help consumers, because last year, between January to September, 740 billion was borrowed from commercial banks. And this is a lot, right? And these monies were necessarily, in quote, survival funds by businesses, which means that there is a lacuna, there is a gap that remains to be filled. So I would hope that going forward, government will look a bit more intently into some of its expenditure, right? And see how to redirect. So if you're traveling with 10 people, cut it down to 4. The funds for 6 could be applied to building a primary healthcare center somewhere, right? If you want to build a new lodge, and the old one is still within useful limits, right? Why don't you pen that to maybe next year? You have 4 years, right? Why don't you pen that? And then that fund applied towards educational infrastructure or digital technology, right? Or bridging the financial inclusion gap, right? So what are our challenges? Infrastructure, FX inefficiencies, security challenges, right? These 3 things, healthcare still comes under the infrastructure deficit that we have. Now, these are urgent. Now, also, I would also be excited, right, to see that government expenditure is applied towards boosting non-oil exports, improving our system. And I like what the speaker has said, my brother, pointing out very clearly that there are various avenues that government can invest in to really give these oil exports a run for its money. And if we don't intentionally do something different, we'll just be reinventing the wheel, right? And what is important is a difference. Beyond all these plenty figures we're calling, beyond the razzmatazz of signing on the 1st, what is important is that that woman in Isaleko, that man in Kwara-na-Moda, that man in New Benin has some buffer because government has intentionally applied itself. If it does not trickle down to the direct welfare of the average ordinary Nigerians, then we will say that it's been successful. The president's broadcast was very interesting, and I find that quite inspiring, part of it, right? But he also, from day one, has been very clear that, look, there's pain, labor pain, before delivery. You've got to bear that pain, you've got to take it and prepare yourself, and at the end of the tunnel, there is light. But even labor pain has epidural, has some painkillers, has stuff that helps to balance the pain, because pain can kill, right? So even as we try to hold on to light at the end of the tunnel, there must be intentional buffers to help. And one way of creating these buffers is by government intentionally cutting down its expenditure. And you see, I have said it on this platform many times. You know, when we keep calling government are Nigerians, right? They're the average Nigerians. Even if you're a president today, the president has relatives who it's biting hard on, who are not in government, who need to survive. And so is every single person, right? And so the key challenge, the principal thing that we must now look at is how do we implement measures that apply to giving some measure of relief and comfort to the average Nigerian? What are the measures we need to put in place, right? Fix our road network. And I've always said, look, if you want to boost the agricultural sector in this country, tidy up the supply chain and you don't have any problem, which means road network. We have 200,000 kilometers of roads. Barely 6,000 are motorable. Barely 60,000, sorry. Now, that's a deficit, a very dangerous deficit. So you see, the farmer in Boko is producing yam, in Taraba is producing a lot of yam, but does not have a supply chain to bring it to Lagos and sell neatly. And so the few people who are able to provide that service milk the system. It trickles down to the end user, me, who is eating the yam. So if you don't now start fixing these challenges, right, whatever the figures are, whatever we bandy, right, will not have a meaning to the average Nigerian. And I think that the focus for this government, like it's the budget, I think is termed the Renewed Hope budget, right? The budget must not just renew hope in words. It must renew hope in deed, right? And I think that the president's body language has shown an intention to do things right.
Talking about matching words with action, Dr. Felix, last year we saw, two key policies of this administration: removal of full subsidy and unification of the foreign exchange. The president also touched on the impact these policies have had on the welfare of majority of Nigerians. How soon, in your opinion, can Nigerians begin to feel the impact on the positives as regards the decisions made last year?
You see, the issue of foreign subsidy removal, it was done this time because this president has the guts, the boldness, the political will to do it. Even if it was not done now, probably it was done by the next administration. We would have still experienced, they say, hardship. You carry out the surgery now or you carry out the surgery later, it's not going to, stop the pain. What matters is what we do as a government to ease the pain of the average Nigerian. And like you said, we are seeing the president, working. This budget is very important. If this budget was lower than last year, I would have been worried. Or if the capital expenditure was less, I would have been worried, because how will this budget affect the average Nigerian on the street? It is true, the capital expenditure. We need to carry out projects. We need to spend money. Without spending money, the average Nigerian cannot have money to spend. I'll give you a perfect example. A few months ago, I was driving right in the street of Abuja. My PA was in the car with me, and he was showing me a construction site, a building, very massive. He said, oh, this was where I supply sand, granite, and I made a lot of money. That's why I bought my car. That's why I built my house in the village. He was able to buy a car. He was able to build a house because somebody was building, had a project where he, as a vendor, was able to supply sand, and that's how he got money. From the car he bought, somebody else sold that car, made money. That's how, the economy is driven. So when we have money to spend, when money is put in the hands of the average Nigeria, that's where, things change. And that's what we want to see, in 2024. I call this year as the year of the manifestation of the Renewed Hope agenda. This is the year that is going to manifest. I'm glad the president is up and running. Now, where I've always had issues, like I said at the beginning, I like to speak as a Nigerian, not necessarily just as a politician. Where we have issue, it's not government expenditure. I agree that we have to reduce government expenditure. We have to tighten our belt as a government. The problem has always been the leakage. We're talking about 28 point something trillion naira budget. The leakage, 2.18 trillion was, assigned to the educational sector. How much of that money are we going to see to, build our schools, to renovate, fix dilapidated schools that are not functioning? The other day, I saw a teacher, teaching a kid, I don't know which local government or which state, computer. They had to draw computer on the board. They had to draw mouse on the board, the keyboard. We couldn't even have, even if it's a dummy computer, for us to teach our kids what computer is. It was so sad that in this day and age, we have the teacher had to draw computer on the board just to explain what a computer and what a keyboard is to our students. So how much of this money, the capital expenditure, are we going to see manifest? What I believe the president should do now is to seal up the leakage. Even if the government decide and say, you know what, we're going to sell all the cars that we purchase. Every government official needs to take public transport. Still, it will not make any difference if we don't see the leakage. The leakage of where money is sent to, to the educational sector, projects that are supposed to be carried on and not carried on, that is where the government need to sit up and work on. Without that, if you like increase the budget, if you like reduce government expenditure, you're not going to see any change. The roadblocks, the leakage, where these funds are going, capital expenditure, we need to turn Nigeria into a construction site. Project needs to be carried out. So at least the average Nigeria can feel the impact of the budget. Otherwise, this will just be an economical statement for those who understand budget, who understand capital expenditure. I bet I can tell you most Nigerians don't even know what I call recurrent expenditure. They don't even understand what you talk about capital expenditure. What they understand is, I have a job, I'm working, I'm getting paid. Those who are in business, I take my goods to the market, I'm able to sell, buy more and sell. That's what the average Nigerian understands.
All right.
But how is this going to happen? We need to stop the leakage, the system.
Dr. Felix, Mr. Moria, let's take a short break. When we return, we're going to turn our attention to Mr. President's New Year Day speech. Stay with us, everyone.